boys and girls. We're back with our next read aloud. We left off last time with a very shocking ending to our chapters. Red finally spoke, which we were not expecting at all. I was very shocked, as I'm pretty sure you guys were shocked as well, that Red spoke, which is the #1 rule, not to talk to humans. And I enjoyed reading all of your predictions as to what you think is going to happen next and how you think Stephen and Samar are going to react. And I actually agree with a lot of your predictions. I think that they are going to be very shocked and not know what to do. So in this video, we are going to be introduced actually to a new character. Her name is Maeve. And when you're done watching this read aloud, you are going to be creating your own Venn diagram on comparing and contrasting Maeve's experience in the town and also Samar's experience in the town. I'm going to show you how to create your own Venn diagram in another video, which you'll be watching after this. But for now, throughout this read aloud, I will give you little hints here and there as to what some similarities and differences are. So listen carefully and keep an eye out for those ideas. And let's continue with our read aloud. Chapter 30. The animals gaped at me in astonishment. Even the youngest babies knew about the "don't talk to people" rule. Bongo darted to my top branch. "Red!" she cried in a strangled whisper. "You can't." "Oh, but I can," I said. "What have I got to lose?" But as I was saying, I returned my attention to Stephen and Samar. They were staring at me, jaws dropped, eyes wide, as frozen as Flash had been not long ago. "We're dreaming," Stephen murmured. "Right?" "At the same time?" Samar asked. "Is that possible?" "Pinch me," Stephen said. Samar complied. "Definitely felt that," Stephen reported. "Maybe it was a dream pinch," Samar suggested. "Excuse me?" I interrupted. "I have 216 rings worth of wisdom to convey, and not much time." Stephen reached for Samar's hand. "If it's a dream," he said, "at least it's a cool one." And so I began. So here we're able to check our predictions. Many of you were correct about Stephen and Samar's reaction. The first sentence, it says, "The animals gaped at me in astonishment." And Stephen and Samar, they were just staring at her, jaws dropped, and their eyes were wide open. So we know that they were like, what's going on? They were surprised, didn't know what to do. So here we could check our prediction. And clearly, they don't believe it themselves. They think they're in a dream, and Stephen is like, "Pinch me." They don't want to believe it. They want to wake up from this dream. They don't believe that a tree is talking to them. And Bongo and the animals are just staring at Red. Bongo's like, "What are you doing?" Now, mind you, in the next chapters that I read, this is all going to be Red talking. Chapters 31 through 38 is all about Red talking to Stephen and Samar. So she must be going on a rant about something. She hasn't been able to talk after 216 years, so clearly she's going to have a lot to say, and she does. So let's listen to it. Chapter 31. I haven't always been a Wishtree. It happened in 1848, long before I was surrounded by concrete and cars, when I was just a few decades old, still a youngster, by Red Oak standards. No longer a lanky sapling. I was solid and strong, but not anchored to the earth the way I am now. This was a time, like many other times, when hungry, desperate people sailed on crowded boats to settle here. Many of them ended up, as they always seem to, in my neighborhood. The blue and green houses were brown then and filled to overflowing with new arrivals. Sometimes the newcomers were welcomed. Sometimes they were not. But they still came, hoping and wishing, as people always do. One of our new residents was a young Irish girl named Maeve. She'd voyaged across the Atlantic with her 19-year-old brother, who died of dysentery during the trip. Their mother had passed away shortly after Maeve was born, their father when the children were 9 and 12. Maeve was solid and plain, but when she smiled, it was like a sunshine peeking through clouds. She had a deep laugh, and her hair was as brilliantly red as my finest autumn attire. 16, alone and penniless, Maeve shared a tiny room with 5 other immigrants. She worked night and day, cleaning and cooking and doing whatever she could to stay alive. Maeve soon discovered she was gifted at caring for the sick. She had no special knowledge, no secret remedies, but she was kind and patient, and she knew how to soothe a fevered brow with a cool cloth as well as anyone. What she didn't know, she was willing to learn. As time passed, word grew of Maeve's abilities. People brought her their sick piglets and their lame horses, their coughing children and fretful babies. Always, she explained that she wasn't sure she could help. But since people in the neighborhood were too poor to go to a doctor, they turned to Maeve. And since people believed she could help them get better, Maeve tried to live up to their hopes. When she succeeded, and even when she didn't, patients and their families would leave small tokens for her. A little figurine of a bird, a hairpin, half a loaf of bread. Once someone even left a leather-covered journal with a tiny silver key that opened its lock. When Maeve was out tending to someone who was sick, people took to leaving their thank yous in my lowest hollow. It was still a fresh wound, just a couple of seasons mended. But because they faced the house where Maeve roomed and not the street, it was a safe place to leave a token of gratitude. That's when I realized that hollows could be a good thing for people, not just birds and animals. Little did I know just how good. So clearly, Red is going back in time to explain some of her history and also a little bit about this new character we're introduced to, whose name is Maeve. And we get to learn a little bit more about Maeve. And there also seem to be some similarities between Samar and Maeve, which is pretty interesting considering that Maeve grew up in a time almost 200 years ago in the 1800s. They're both very kind. They're good with people and animals. Like Maeve, she's gifted at caring for the sick, so a lot of people would bring their children or their animals to her. Not only this, but when Maeve first came to the town, she was all alone. Her family passed away, and she came to the country all by herself. It's not the same as Samar's experience. Samar didn't have to endure all the things that Maeve did. However, when Samar came to this new town, she doesn't have any friends, and she's feeling very lonely. She's alone. So when they both come to the town, they both share that same idea that they were alone. They had no one with them, which is sad. Chapter 32. The years passed, and Maeve became as connected to the neighborhood as I was. Even as newcomers from other lands added their music and food and language to our little part of the world. No matter where people were from, Maeve cared for them as best she could. I grew tougher, my older limbs less pliable, my shadow longer. More trees and shrubs joined me, but there was plenty of sun for all of us, and we never wanted for water. I'd hosted many families by then, mice and chipmunks in particular. My closest confidant was a young gray squirrel named Squibbles. All squirrels' names begin with the letter S-Q-U. Squibbles was especially fond of Maeve, who often fed the little squirrel table scraps. Privately, Squibbles and I worried about Maeve. Along the way, Maeve had seen a suitor or two. But nothing much came of those flirtations. She had friends aplenty and work to do from dawn till dusk. Still, she seemed lonely. Sometimes Maeve would sit on the porch steps watching happy families stroll past, and her eyes would well up with tears. At night she'd gaze out an open upstairs window, and her sighs would float to us on the breeze, melancholy as the call of a mourning dove. Melancholy is another word for sadness, like very sad, depressing. Often Maeve would sit at the base of my trunk and write in her journal. Now and then she'd read passages aloud. She spoke about the Irish countryside fading into fog. She spoke about her family she'd lost. She spoke about her secrets, hopes, and fears and longings. She had love to give, and no one to give it to. Maeve adored early mornings. When the world was bathed in a mist and the sun was still a promise, she would lean against my trunk and close her eyes, and hum a tune from her childhood. One day, the first day of May, Maeve joined me at dawn. To my surprise, she reached up to my lowest bow and gently tied a scrap of blue striped fabric in a careful knot. "I wish," she whispered, "for someone to love with all my heart." That was my first wish, and the beginning of many more. So in this chapter, we learn that Maeve was actually Red's first wish, and that's how she became to be known as the Wishtree. We also learn or notice some more similarities between Maeve and Samar. One thing is that the squirrel Squibbles, she's very fond of Maeve, and this is similar to Bongo and Samar's relationship. Bongo is very fond of Samar, so they both have those same relationships with animals, different animals, but the same relationship. Also, Samar sits at the base of Red's trunk and writes in her journal. Samar does the same thing. She likes to go sit at Red's trunk just to think. And lastly is, of course, the wish. In this chapter, we learn that Maeve's wish was, "I wish for someone to love with all my heart." And we know Samar's wish was that she wishes for a friend. Now, they're slightly different wishes. However, they're both wishes for people to either love or to talk to, and they both make this wish because they are lonely. So that's the similarity. Chapter 33. As the weeks passed, the piece of fabric on my branch drew many comments. Some of the folks in our neighborhood, the ones from Ireland, would nod knowingly and smile. To them, Maeve would simply say, in their littling voice, "That's my raggy tree. She's not a hawthorn, but she'll do just fine." People who'd come here from other lands, and there were many of them, would frown at the rag or even reach up to remove it. Maeve would warn, "Don't you be touching my wish now." Patiently, again and again, she would explain how in her old home, leaving wishes on a raggy tree was a time-honored tradition. Now and then, people would ask Maeve what she'd wish for. She'd tell them the truth, with a sigh and a wry smile. "Nothing much. Just someone to love with all my heart. Nothing much at all." Sometimes people would laugh. Sometimes they would roll their eyes. "A wish on a rag won't bring you love, dearie," they would say. But usually, people gave Maeve a kind smile, a squeeze on the arm, a knowing nod. And then they, too, would ask if they could add a wish of their own. Chapter 34. Another year passed. As May neared, I found myself hosting more scraps of fabric than budding leaves. Squibbles tried to steal a few fabric strips to line his dray, the nest made of leaves and twigs high in one of my forked branches. I explained he had to stick with moss and pine needles until the first of May. Wishes, according to Maeve, could not be until after May Day. Then, the ones that weren't carried off in the wind or dragged to the ground by the rain could be removed by people, or by enterprising squirrels. I suspect she made up that rule for my benefit so I could grow unfettered, without the weight of wet rags dragging me down. Just before dawn on the 1st of May, a young woman approached me. She had dark, wavy hair and wore a tattered gray coat. In her arms was a wrapped bundle. "Psst," Squibbles whispered to me. "Here comes another wish, Red." But Squibbles was wrong. There was no wish. Swiftly, but with great care, the girl placed her bundle in my hollow. A thank you for Maeve, I realized. A loaf of bread, perhaps. The girl had probably been one of her patients. She was gone as quickly as she'd come. Like a hummingbird, I thought. There, then not there. Like a gust of wind. So now we're also starting to learn a little bit more about the history of how May Day came to be and how people started making wishes on May 1st. And in fact, we learned that it originated in Ireland, which is Maeve's home country, and they used to call it raggy trees. So we're also getting to learn a little bit more of real history in real life, which is cool. Chapter 35. Just a few minutes later, Maeve opened the door of the little brown house. She smiled at me and at the scraps waving in the early morning breeze. And then came the cry. Wail was more like it. Coming from me. Not the meek peep of a wren chick. Not the shy squeak of a mouse pup. No. This was a cry of a righteous indignation. This was a baby. This is very strange and peculiar. I wonder why this woman left a baby on its own in a tree. So let's continue reading. Let's find out. Chapter 36. The baby had a note attached to her blanket. Haltingly, Maeve tried to read it out loud. Italian, she murmured. Only later, when she consulted one of her patients, did she understand its meaning. Please give her the care I cannot. I wish for you both a life of love. The baby's hair was black, Maeve's was red. The baby's eyes were brown, Maeve's were blue. The baby was Italian, Maeve was Irish. They were made for each other. Maeve named the baby Amadora, which meant in Italian, the gift of love. So after all, Maeve's wish came true. She asked for someone that would love her and that she could love, and she ended up getting a kid. It wasn't her own, but she took the baby in as hers. And it's cute because the name Amadora means the gift of love, which ties back to her wish. She wished for someone to love. It's really cute. Chapter 37. Many in the neighborhood didn't approve of an unmarried Irish woman raising an abandoned Italian baby. People talked, as they will, and they tisk-tisked, as they must. Some people were even angry. They said hurtful things. They told Maeve that Amadora didn't belong. They told Maeve she and the baby should leave. We now learn that Maeve was not welcomed into the town anymore once she took in the baby as her own. This is also another similarity between Samar's experience and Maeve's experience. They both were not welcomed for different reasons, very different reasons, and very silly reasons, actually. Things they could not control, or like very silly things. And it's sad that they both had to listen to people throw these slurs at them and say hurtful things towards them. Maeve merely smiled, held Amadora close, and waited and hoped. On dark nights when hope was scarce, she would sing an old Irish tune mixed with a newer Italian song that she had learned from a neighbor. Scarce means that something is rare, there's not a lot of it. There's very little of something. So there was very little hope, she means. The melody was sweet, the words were silly. The effect was always the same, a smile from little Amma. Sure enough, the longer Maeve waited, the kinder people grew. And before long, Amma, as she came to be called, was as much a part of our messy garden as all the rest of us. When Amma was old enough to feed Squibbles and his family, she did. When she was strong enough to climb me, she did. And when she was ready to make wishes of her own, she did. Amma grew up steady and honest and kind, like her mother, and had babies of her own, and then grandchildren and great-grandchildren. Eventually, Amma and her husband bought the little brown house, and the one right next to it, and painted them blue and green. Years later, they purchased a house across the street and began to rent the blue and green houses to other families. The family grew and prospered and argued and failed and loved and laughed. Always and forever, the laughter kept them going. And when Amma's grandson had a little girl, he chose a fine Italian name for her, with a fine Irish middle name, Francesca Maeve. We learn a little something new here now. We learn that Francesca, that we know in the book in present time, owns Red. Francesca was Amma's great-grandchild. So we're learning a little bit more about the family history between Red and Francesca's family now. So Red's been here from the start, just like just like Maeve. And it's also reassuring to hear that eventually, over time, the kinder people grew with their feelings towards Maeve and Ama and them staying in the town. So I hope the same happens with Samar and her family. Chapter 38. As for me, my reputation grew. Hadn't Maeve's wish come true in the heart of a Wishtree? Didn't that mean anything was possible? Of course, as Squibbles often reminded me, I had nothing to do with it. This isn't a fairy tale, Red, he would say, but people are full of longings. And decade after decade, a blessing and a burden it has been. All those wishes, all those years. But everyone needs to hope. So it wasn't Red who was the one who granted this wish. It was hope and just believing in dreams and longings and yearnings for things. And that takes place in your heart. You have to believe and you have to hope and you have to dream, which is another theme of this book. Now, mind you that Red was talking this whole entire time throughout these chapters that we've read. So I wonder how Stephen and Sumar are going to react, because clearly Red had a lot to say. She hasn't talked to humans at all, and she's finally speaking up. She has found her voice, and she has had enough, and she is talking to Stephen and Sumar. She wants them to be friends, and so she decides to speak up, finally. So I wonder how they're going to react. So now that we are done with this read aloud, I gave hints as to many similarities and differences throughout these chapters of Maeve's experience and Sumar's experience coming into the new town and their experience with Red the Wishtree. So now you're going to watch the next video, which I show you how to make your own Venn diagram, and you're going to follow those directions in that video. Alrighty, we'll continue reading this tomorrow, and happy reading!